Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue, and today I'm putting the cheap offset smoker against a cheap Kamado head to head to find out which is the best cheap option for under 400 bucks. So this test fascinates me for two main reasons. First, I refuse to believe the general rule of thumb that the more you pay, the better quality barbecue that you're gonna get. If you believe that, go to Snow's Barbecue and sample Miss Tootsie's brisket and you'll be blown away. And then look up afterwards that she's only cooking with choice grade briskets. And so you watch all these videos, Prime, Wagyu beef tallow, and all these other things that we do, and you are completely overlooking that simplicity with expert skill can turn out an amazing quality result. Just like, I mentioned I bought this Oklahoma Joe's as my cheap offset smoker. If we gave this to someone like Aaron Franklin or Miss Tootsie, I'm sure they could blow away 99% of the average backyard barbecuer. So skill versus the cost of the product very seldom are exactly aligned, where the more you spend, the better quality barbecue that you're going to get. That being said, I put both of these smokers head to head against more expensive counterparts, whether it's the Akorn versus my Kamado Joe, or it's the Oklahoma Joe's versus my Smoke North offset. And there sometimes are features in more expensive pits that turn out a better result. So I've modified, for example, my Oklahoma Joe's with a stack extension, a gasket to help cut down on the leaks and make sure smoke is passing over. I've done a semi-insulated firebox as well as relocating the air intake, and that's made a really big difference. So sometimes the product actually matters, and other times we can make up for a lot with skill. The second big difference that I want to talk about is challenging the norms of what is a Kamado versus what is an offset. Now, full disclosure, my bias here, and I have a bias, I'm sure everyone has one, is I believe if you're going to use an offset smoker that we should run it like an offset, which is why for my first test, I threw the best of all my experience in live fire cooking in order to turn out a result. So I took my full-size splits, broke them down in half, and then broke them down in a half again with an axe so I could get nice clean combustion. Wasn't overly satisfied with the results, and so I made some changes, including the smokestack and those other modifications, and got a much better result. But littered throughout the comments is, James, you're not using the Oklahoma Joe's the way that I get my best results, which is actually pumping it full of charcoal, using charcoal for heat, and then adding wood splits for flavor. Well, that got me thinking, that's kind of exactly what we do in every other charcoal grill, where we're using charcoal for heat and adding wood for flavor. And after countless tests, I've closed the gap, but I've just not been able to take a charcoal grill and get it to cook the same quality ribs, brisket, or pulled pork as what I can turn out on my Smoke North offset. So that got me thinking, when does an offset become an offset if we are really just using charcoal and wood for flavor? And will it really be any different than a charcoal grill using wood for flavor? Given both of these smokers come in at a similar price point, less than $400 Canadian or under about 300 bucks US, I wanted to put them head to head and find out what are the pros and what are the cons of going for an inexpensive offset versus an inexpensive Kamado if you want a great smoker for your backyard. So, game plan. To set up my Oklahoma Joe's representing Team Cheap Offset, I'm going to remove the semi-insulated firebox that I built. Again, I was really happy with how this performed, but it's going against so many of your comments, so I want to give it a try and find out if you might be onto something. So I removed those fire bricks that I installed, and in their place, I dropped down the included charcoal grate that comes with an Oklahoma Joe's, as well as using the two spare racks to create a bit of that V-rack, which is very common, and I've seen people like Smoke Trails and a couple others use that in their videos. So not taking credit here, credit where credit's due. Many others have thought of that, but this is the sort of conventional wisdom. I've also dropped my water pan down to the lower level because, again, this is what I did last time and it acts like a bit of a baffle, and that was getting me more of that direct flow sort of offset air pattern that I wanted, where we're coming up and over our food, just like I get on my Smoke North. I've left all my other modifications the same, whether it's the intake, the gasket, or the smokestack. And the game plan here is just to get a charcoal chimney, light that up, dump it into our firebox, use that to start to preheat some of our steel. And instead of dumping all of the charcoal in, I dumped about 3/4, added more charcoal just so it would help it catch, and added a second basket of charcoal into our firebox. Once we had that going, I started dropping in some wood splits until they combusted. For our inexpensive Kamado, our cheap Kamado, I'm going with a version of my double indirect setup. And so the way that I'm going to do that is to place 2 or 3 wood chunks on the bottom, cover them up with a small amount of charcoal, use my grill blaze or grill gun to get a nice hot fire started in the center. And like you would normally, I'm dropping down in the included heat deflector plate, and then I'm using my 2 fire bricks that I took out here, but you could use any spacer. So long as there's an air gap, the double indirect will work. And I'm using some spare ceramic deflector plates. And you might say, James, well, that's not really fair. The deflector plates aren't included with the Char-Griller Akorn. Well, neither is the smoke extension stack or that inlet. And so given that those deflector plates cost under 50 bucks and my mods here cost under 50 bucks, I wanted to sort of let each one do best foot forward without giving a significant advantage to one or the other. So the only modification on the Akorn is double indirect with spare deflectors, and the only modification on the Oklahoma Joe is the gaskets, the air intake, and the smoke extension. And both of those can be had for under $50 US. I've picked up 2 equal looking baby back ribs for today's experiment. So like always, I'm just going to give those a quick trim, remove anything that will burn, as well as pulling off the membrane. For our rub, I'm going with my normal salt, pepper, garlic, and Lowry's mixture. I'll put the details down in the description. And I added just a little bit of paprika at the end to give it a bit of that mahogany red color. Using mustard as a binder, I got both racks of ribs ready, and we're gonna bring them over and get them on the smoker in a couple minutes. The other thing that we're gonna do today, I mentioned Snow's earlier, and sticking to simple things done well, we're gonna use a mop sauce. This is something Snow's and many other Texas barbecue joints do. So once we've got our ribs on, I'll take you over to the kitchen and show you how we're going to prep that. I'll meet you a little bit later for the taste test, as well as any learnings or things that come up as we go along the way in terms of what you should look at if you're considering a cheap Kamado or a cheap offset in terms of which smoker represents the best bang for your under 400 bucks. Let's get started on our mop sauce. For our mop, dollar store sells these for about $1, so we'll use that in a little bit. I'm going to start with a half stick of butter. Get our conduction oven on here. Next, we'll do a quick rough chop on our onion. Okay, next, let's get to work on our garlic, get the skins off. So for the ones where the skin didn't come off that we could throw in, we'll just take the heel of our knife here, help that release. Take you fast forward while I get the skins off the rest of these and into the pot. We're not going to break those down any further. So now that our onions and garlic are starting to get translucent and render down, we can get to work adding the rest of our ingredients. If you have mustard powder already, you can do that. I don't have any, but I have some mustard seed from a previous recipe. I add this to recipes all the time. So I've just emptied out my pepper cannon. I'm going to add some mustard seed and make some of my own really quickly. There we go, grind that up. There we go, some quick mustard powder. Put back what we didn't use for the seeds. Add my peppercorns back, grind up some pepper. It's just a little bit less, it's actually a fair bit less than about a tablespoon if we were measuring. This is Malden's smoked sea salt. A little bit of garlic powder. We've got garlic in there, so we don't need too much. This will be about a teaspoon. Again, about a teaspoon. Juice of a lime. Sorry, colorblind. Juice of a lemon. The sauce that everybody, myself included, can't pronounce. A little bit of Worcester. A little bit of hot sauce. Ketchup. We'll need a little bit more ketchup, so I'll get that off camera and add that, but just a little bit of beer. Let this simmer down for about 15-20 minutes, and we are ready to start mopping. I'll meet you over by the pits. Okay, let's see where we're at for temps. Just shy of 170, so we are nearly there. So I think this is a great time to start applying our mop sauce. Just move this so I don't spill. Flip and repeat. Go do the same on our Kamado. Okay, these are actually looking really good. It looks like our bark, despite starting an hour after the offset, I think our Kamado has caught up, and maybe just from the look of the bark, pulled ahead a little bit here, but it's not time to taste them yet. Keep everything from drying out. Do the same thing on the bottom here. We're gonna let each of these cook upside down for the next half hour or so. Okay, let's take a look. I think we are done. So I'm just gonna get these off, let them rest in foil, especially since not only did we catch up, but I think we passed our offset ribs. So we maybe need another 20 minutes on those. So I'm just gonna wrap these in foil. I'll meet you when we are ready for the taste test and we get our offset ribs off. Mark these so I don't end up mixing them up. All right, our ribs have rested and they look amazing. I'll say, visually, there's not much between these two. So on my left, your right, these are our Char-Griller Akorn representing Team Kamado ribs. And over here, we have our Oklahoma Joe's ribs. So let's get these sliced up and dive in for our taste test. Can't wait. So while there wasn't much to separate them looking at the top, where there are some obvious differences is looking at the smoke ring. So on my right, your left is the offset, and on my left, your right here is the Kamado, and you can see a bit of difference, a pretty obvious difference in terms of the smoke ring, but let's see if we can taste that. All right, the best part of the day, at least for me, is seeing how they taste. I'm gonna start with our offset just because they sure look the prettiest. Give these a taste. So good, perfect, clean bite, right through, tender, smoky, nothing wrong with that. Let's dive into our Kamado rib here. Same deal. I don't know if you can see that. Perfect bite through tenderness, nice clean bite, super tender. I can already tell if I was blindfolded in doing this, it would be just down to a 50-50 chance of guessing. Like, these are razor close. So knowing which one is which, I'm gonna try and see if I can pick up on any differences. First round, the only thing I noticed is the Kamado ribs were slightly more tender. I don't know if the radiant heat or the extra heat source there makes any difference whatsoever, but I'm gonna need another bite to try and figure this one out. Let's go for it. That is as close as two different ribs cooked on two different smokers can get. I'm gonna call these, this is indistinguishable. Like, you mix them up on me and played a prank, and I would tell you the one is the other one. Like, no idea. They are identical. So like I always do with these head-to-head battles, as soon as I did my taste test, I took them inside and did a blind taste test with the family and asked which ones they prefer. Just because, as I'm the one standing out here doing the smoking, you tend to get your senses and clothes saturated with smoke, and it can be very difficult to discern very slight differences. In fact, sometimes the best way to do this with your own food is to save some for leftovers and taste them the next day. And you get a better sense. If you've been just standing in billows of smoke and charcoal and everything for 5 hours or so at a time like we were today, it can make it very, very difficult to pick it up. So I took them in, gave them to the family, and my wife said there was like an ever so slight preference for the offset ribs, but said in her words, it was a marginal difference. They were near identical. So my call was identical. Family overruled and said there was a very slight difference, but used the term marginal. So I just want to pass that on. So now that we know there was maybe a slight advantage for Team Cheap Offset over Team Cheap Kamado, let's go through the reality of, cooking on these two in terms of what actually happened. So starting with the method on the offset, full disclosure here, I'm not a fan of the charcoal adding wood. This did a couple of things. I think it robbed flavor in terms of the ribs that I cooked in my modification video, where we were able to get nice clean combustion. This didn't match my premium offset, but it was much closer than my first attempt, or I'll even say than this attempt. And so if you have an Oklahoma Joe's or a cheap offset smoker, I would encourage you to maybe try and find a way to follow that video and create some of the mods where you can run a nice clean fire and use wood. With this method, I only used about 4 12-inch splits. And so on one hand, by using the charcoal, we gained much longer duration out of our wood. Instead of every 15-20 minutes or sort of reaching the high side of 24 minutes with my method, you gain a lot more time. but it is not as hands-free maintenance as you might think. And so early on, if I did this and I had the firebox closed, you'd have nice clean combustion. You'd turn your head this way and you'd turn around, and then all of a sudden it's billowing white smoke. And so now I understand why kits like the Prometheus have that 6-shooter option to prop your firebox door open, is because there was just no configuration, everything I tried, that could get this to burn nice and clean. So I had to rig up sort of a do-it-yourself fire door hack and just use the wood splits to prop the door open. That did two things. It helped dehydrate the wood splits, so when I would add them, they would combust nice and clean, as well as making sure that we got adequate airflow. But this just again meant that we were tending to our fire almost constantly in order to get that nice clean combustion, as well as holding the temperatures. I'll also say I think this is hurting our flavor because we only used about those 4 splits. It was far more charcoal heat and wood flavor, and this is just not going to taste the same as using wood splits. So when I did the full-size split, cut in half, and then broken down with the axe, I used an entire bag of these same splits, where I used only 4 here. And so, you know, if you're only using 4 versus you're using about a dozen, this is just less wood circulating over our ribs. And I'm gonna say, for me, I'm not gonna be going back to the charcoal and the V-grate method. I'm gonna go back to my previous cook, which was the semi-insulated firebox, because I think that is turning out the best result of everything I've tried on a cheap offset smoker. For cooking on the Kamado, even though this is an inexpensive Kamado, it works just like ones costing 7 times as much. Was once we built our fire, installed our deflector plates, and got our temperatures stable, the only thing that we did to touch it was adding the mop sauce. And so I didn't do this today, but on other weekend cooks, I've been out, you know, cut the grass, go to the gym. You don't need to be anywhere near your fire other than those time intervals when you might need to wrap something or add a mop sauce. So which would I pick? So to answer this question, there's a couple factors that I think we need to walk through. We've already covered the fact that they're priced very similarly, and despite the outside dimensions, the size and the capacity is pretty equal as well. I can fit, you know, 3 racks of ribs, no problem, in this Akorn by Char-Griller, and with the sort of equal pocket of where heat is when I use temperature probes to get that nice consistent temperature, there's really about space for 3 racks of ribs in a range that operates within 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit of one another. Now, if you can range them differently, trim them, you can get a little bit more, but capacity is similar, price is similar. So we're really getting down to a few other factors. I would also actually put in quality in that bucket. There's both some hesitations on quality. If you look up the Char-Griller Akorn made of metal, if you don't cover it, it's prone to rusting. And on my Oklahoma Joes here, you can already see on the firebox, and I had this after my first fire, you start to see some warping, paint peeling, and it's also prone to rust. So Again, I think those two cancel each other out, and both would benefit from a cover and just good maintenance to help get more longevity out of either one. So if it's not price, and it's not capacity, and it's not overall quality separating them apart, how are we going to make this decision? Well, I think this comes down to a couple things. First, how do you want to spend your time? With the Char-Griller Akorn, outside of adding or opening it up to add my mop sauce, just so we were doing the same thing on each, this is set it and forget it. That's one of the reasons that I love Kamados, is they provide, to me, more flavor than any pellet grill that I've cooked off of, yet they don't come with a lot more homework in terms of being tied to your Kamado. I regularly cook and go cut the grass, go for a mountain bike ride, go to the gym. I use meters often to keep track of it. I can check on my watch, see where we're at, and I don't have to do anything. So it's a very low involvement cook. But for some people, and myself included, some days I like the involvement. I like tending to the fire. And so the hands-on tactile experience with the offset gives you that hands-on experience. But this is where I'll throw a caveat in for this setup using the V-grates with charcoal versus wood. You're putting in just as much work, and I would say clarify that you're putting in just as much work, because you add the charcoal, you add your wood, you look away, and if you don't have the bottom door here on our firebox open, in a few seconds it could switch to dirty smoke instantly. And so even though I added fewer splits, about 4 total, versus burning an entire bag with my method, it was almost equally as hands-on. The other thing that I didn't like about the setup with the V-Grate, and following some of the comments here and moving the fire towards the firebox, is in order to get the fire burning cleanly with the larger split, I had to prop open the firebox door. And this started to change the draw characteristics, where instead of smoke being drawn up our extended chimney, I was seeing smoke, or sometimes a lick of flame, being drawn out this way. So we're getting some heat in our cook chamber and we are cooking, but this significantly reduced the quality of smoke. And I didn't do them side by side, but this is not a big time period between when I did my modification ribs, and these ones don't hold a candle to that method. So if you have a cheap offset smoker or Oklahoma Joe's and you've never tried how I did that, where I took a 12-inch split, broke it down with my miter saw, and then broke that down with my axe, which I later didn't need once I did the semi-insulated firebox, I would encourage you to try that, because it is much closer to a true offset in terms of flavor. I wouldn't put it kind of up there with the best of the best that I've ever done on my premium backyard offset, but given the two, I have plenty of girls that cook with charcoal and use wood with flavor, and the fact that we are comparing one of the most energy efficient Kamados, which is very difficult. It's the most difficult one that I own or I've ever used in terms of getting wood flavor in there, because it's just so energy efficient. The fact that these are within plus or minus a couple % of one another, I think just again validates that we are not getting the full benefit of an offset flavor. So all of that to say, which would I pick? I think if you're going to get an offset, use it like an offset where you're actually burning wood, but that means going through that extra step of tending your fire and turning out the best result. And for under 400 bucks, the best result that I can get on this is following that method. If you have the same 400 bucks and you want to do a little bit more, I would say the amount of energy and effort involved with using the Akorn or any other Kamado for that matter, it's a factor of 10 to 1. It's significantly less energy and effort to maintain your fire. So if you don't necessarily want to commit yourself to spending all day outside absorbing all those wonderful smoke smells and making little adjustments to your fire, you just sort of want a bit of that set it and forget it experience, or you want to do things like steaks, pizza, chicken, or other things, for me, I think my money is on cheap Kamado over cheap offset today. Thanks so much for asking that question. I was really curious how this would go. I knew it would be close, but I didn't expect it to be that close. I hope if you find yourself in the situation where you're considering one of these two grills, that this gives you some information to help you understand which smoker might be right for you. But that's it for today. I'm James from Soka Dad Barbecue signing off. And remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.